Picture this: a cold morning in 2008, suburban America, a living room lit by a flickering TV, and a kitchen table buried under bills like a paper avalanche. The phone won't stop ringing. Not friends, not family, collectors. Dad's hours at the plant got cut, then the job disappeared. Mom is stacking shifts like Jenga blocks, praying the tower doesn't fall. The kids feel it, even if nobody says it out loud. And the credit card statement? It's not a bill, it's a trap with a smiling logo. A balance that was supposed to be temporary starts compounding at a rate that feels like it was designed by a supervillain. The American dream doesn't explode, it unravels. One late fee at a time, one interest charge at a time. Now here's the twist. That's not a history lesson. That's the vibe that just walked back into the room in January 2026. And this time, the spark is political. President Donald Trump has publicly called for a one-year cap on credit card interest rates at 10%, beginning January 20th. 10%, not 20, not 25, not penalty APR near 30, 10. And he frames it as a rescue mission for households getting squeezed. A shot across the bow at what he calls credit card gouging. But Wall Street heard the number, did the math, and immediately started sweating through the suit. Because if you cap the price of unsecured risk, you don't just lower a number, you rearrange an entire machine. So is this a lifeline for families? Or a Pandora's box that detonates rewards, tightens credit, and pushes vulnerable borrowers into even darker corners of the lending world? That is the question. Welcome to the Wall Street Channel. If you like financial plot twists with real-world consequences, subscribe and hit the bell, because this story has everything: politics, lobbying, banking profits, and the quiet, brutal math of compounding interest. To understand why this 10% cap idea hits like a grenade, you have to understand how credit cards became what they are. Because credit cards didn't start as a debt factory. In the beginning, they were basically convenience and status. Think 1950, Diners Club, a charge card vibe, pay it off, feel fancy, don't carry cash. Then 1958, Bank of America launches Bank AmeriCard, and the modern revolving credit era ignites. You can carry a balance, you can pay over time. And that one design choice, revolving balances, is where the money starts to multiply. Now jump to the late 1970s. Inflation is high, rates are volatile, and banks are chafing under state usury caps. Then comes the legal earthquake, a Supreme Court decision in 1978, Marquette v. First of Omaha, that effectively lets national banks charge interest based on the laws of the state where the bank is located, even if the borrower lives somewhere with stricter limits. Translation: the cap becomes optional if you pick the right home state. And states hungry for jobs start competing to attract credit card operations. That race helps turn credit cards from a consumer product into a profit engine. Then in the 1990s, another key domino. The Supreme Court, in Smiley v. Citibank, backs a regulatory interpretation that treats certain fees like late fees as interest for key legal purposes. Translation: the menu of ways to charge you expands, and the rules follow the bank's home turf. And yes, Congress did step in after the 2008 crisis with the Credit Card Act, forcing more transparency and limiting certain abusive practices. But it did not impose a hard national cap on APR. So the core reality stayed intact. Credit card pricing is largely risk-based, unsecured, and allowed to run hot. Fast forward to now, the debt is enormous. New York Fed data shows U.S. credit card balances around $1.23 trillion as of the third quarter of 2025. That's not a statistic, that's a pressure system. And the average interest rate environment has been hovering around the 20% neighborhood across accounts, with plenty of borrowers paying higher depending on credit tier and product type. Meanwhile, delinquency measures have been a concern, and regulators have been watching credit stress carefully as household budgets tighten. In plain English, a lot of people are using plastic to patch holes in their monthly cash flow. Gas, groceries, car repairs, medical bills. The bridge becomes the road. Now enter the 10% cap proposal. Trump's public messaging is simple and emotionally powerful. It's a populist argument. Working people are getting crushed by high APRs, and the government should step in to stop it. And here's what makes it politically weird. It has cross-ideological appeal. Progressives have pushed versions of a 10% cap too, and there's bipartisan legislation floating around that would cap rates for a period of time. So the headline writes itself. Left and right agree on something. That alone should make you suspicious, because when Washington agrees, it's usually because the incentives are messy and the consequences are complicated. Wall Street's pushback is also straightforward. Credit cards are one of the most profitable lines in consumer banking, precisely because they are unsecured and priced for losses. If you force the APR down to 10%, the argument goes, the system has to rebalance. Banks don't magically eat the risk for free. They respond, they tighten, they reprice, they cut limits, they chop rewards, they add fees, they shut accounts. And the people who get hit first are not the wealthy transactors who pay their balance in full every month. The first to get cut off are near-prime and subprime borrowers, the people who are already living on the edge. In other words, the policy meant to help the squeezed can end up squeezing them harder, just in a different way. It's like saying, "Congratulations, your water bill is cheaper," and then discovering the water only runs 2 days a week. Some industry groups and analysts have thrown out dramatic estimates about how many accounts would become uneconomical under a 10% cap and how much rewards value could evaporate. Whether you buy the exact numbers or not, the direction of impact is logically consistent. If the APR ceiling is forced down, the business model shifts toward fewer perks and stricter access. You might see 10% cards with no points, no cash back, low limits, and aggressive underwriting. You might see annual fees rise. You might see banks steer people into installment loans, where pricing flexibility is different. And yes, you might see more activity in shadow credit, payday-style products, high-fee alternatives, or creative lending structures that technically comply while still extracting value. When you cap one lever, the machine finds another lever. On the flip side, supporters say, good. They argue the status quo is a moral and economic failure. Households paying enormous interest charges, debt spirals, and a system that profits from minimum payments and long payoff timelines. And they point to research-based estimates suggesting consumers could save on the order of tens of billions annually in reduced interest if a cap were enacted at scale. For a family carrying a few $1,000s at a high APR, the difference between 10% and 20+% is real money, real breathing room. The kind of breathing room that can keep a car from being repossessed, or prevent a late rent payment, or stop a medical bill from turning into a credit score collapse. So let's be honest, both things can be true at the same time. A cap can reduce interest burdens for people who keep access, and it can also reduce access for the people the market deems riskiest. That's the trade-off hiding under the politics. Now here's the part most headlines skip. As of today, a public call is not the same thing as a binding nationwide rule. The legal and legislative path matters. Implementing a true national APR cap is not as simple as posting a number online. Congress, regulators, and the courts would all get involved. Banks would lobby like their lives depend on it, because for some portfolios, they do. And even if something passed, the details would decide the outcome. Does it apply to all cards or only new originations? Does it cover fees? How do you treat introductory promos, penalty pricing, risk tiers, and small business cards? What counts as interest in practice? The devil isn't in the details. The devil is the details. So what should you watch next if you're trying to stay ahead of this story like an investor, a consumer, or just a human being who hates getting fleeced? First, watch whether this proposal turns into drafted legislation with actual enforcement mechanics. Second, watch bank earnings calls and guidance, because you'll hear the coded language of how they would react. Tightening underwriting, rebalancing rewards, portfolio optimization, which is corporate for you're about to like your card a lot less. Third, watch the payments ecosystem, because if credit tightens, spending patterns shift, and that can ripple into retailers, BNPL providers, and even marketing and travel industries that rely on points and perks to drive behavior. And finally, watch the human story, because the loudest voices in this fight will be politicians and bankers, but the consequences land on households. The family that needs a bridge to the next paycheck, the small business that floats inventory on a card, the person one emergency away from falling behind. 10% sounds like mercy. It can also become a gate that closes. So is Trump's 10% cap a heroic rescue or a chaos button? It depends on what becomes law, what gets carved out, and how the banking machine adapts once the easy money dial is turned down. Either way, this is not a small tweak. It's a direct challenge to a trillion-dollar ecosystem built on revolving balances, risk pricing, and behavioral nudges that keep people paying for years. And if this is the opening shot, the bigger question is what comes next. If Washington starts capping credit card rates, what else gets capped? Student loans? Overdraft-like fees? Mortgage add-ons? Once you normalize price controls in finance, the next chapters write themselves. Stay sharp, because the market isn't just reacting to a number, it's reacting to a new kind of political appetite, and that, more than any single policy, is what moves money. And you? What do you think of this plan? Write a comment and let us know.